Just some thoughts before I forget. I was going over the Newman motor design a little, polishing up one of the versions, version 15. It needed some work. And thinking about it, I still hold to the guess estimation that the rotor, the permanent magnet, the spinning bar magnet, my simulation of it, the equivalences in real life, between real life and my equivalent simulation of it, I still hold to the guess estimation that the voltage of my simulation of that spinning magnetic field is equivalent to the size of that permanent bar magnet, while its inductance is equivalent to its magnetic strength. Just a guess. I could be way off, but if true, if we compare the two versions, version 15 and 16, and now I've changed 16, I've altered it to be two versions, 16A and 16B, in which 16A is full throttle speed, intended to deliver 200 amps to the coil, while cruising speed, it delivers 60 amps. It should be 50, but I went for 58. I thought it was good enough, which is not bad. 58 amps delivered to the coil. Comparing then 16, which is the EV version, with 15, which is the Newman version taken to extreme, so that we have very little amps on the coil. They're negative. We have a good deal of volts, though, more than an EV motor requires, 560 volts. I think Dr. Hastings measured 667, although that was inferred. He didn't state that, but I inferred it, because he stated things like watts and amps or something, so I inferred the volts. More than what the battery pack supplied, because in the EV version I supply 150 volts from the battery pack, but in the Dr. Hastings version I had the battery pack at 300 volts, because that's what chapter 6 of Newman's book designates. And, Dr. Hastings measured 300 volts coming from the battery pack, 304 I believe exactly. And so the volts in that version 15, the Dr. Hastings version that he measured, the table model I think it was, 300 pound coil, was it 300 pound? No. 145 pound coil, 14 pound bar magnet. I did manage to get the voltage to go negative, and above 300 volts being put out by the battery pack, and I did get the amperage to go negative. It was RMS 12 something milliamps, but its average was negative polarity, and since RMS is always positive, I just took the negative from the average and tacked it on to the 12 milliamps RMS to get negative 12 milliamps. So, that's my presumption, and I'm hoping it's true. So the voltage is negative, and the amps are negative, and the voltage, absolute value of voltage, is above what the battery is putting out, and so it's able to overcome the battery and recharge it. Meanwhile, it's running. While it's running. So that was version 15. It's called Duet because I've doubled the coil. I was able to do that on version 14 as well, but I never made a image because I don't know, I didn't bother to do a screenshot of version 14 because that's only one coil. What's interesting though is when I did 15 originally, I had two 300 volt battery packs because I had two coils, one for each. And I had the neons, and the capacitor between them, or capacitors. So I thought, well, that's not right. How can I do a comparison if version 15 is significant or too different from version 16? It should only be different in just a few respects, or one respect. So I took out the extra battery pack in version 15 and consolidated it to just one 300-volt battery pack, just like version 16 is one 150-volt battery pack. And lo and behold, version 15 improved its performance. It's like, what? Less battery is better? Well, yeah, probably because they were, what, conflicting with each other? I don't know. It was just weird. It's just totally unforeseeable. So I thought I'd make this video to let you know. It's like sometimes the funniest of improvements, the funniest of changes will create an improvement. And logic, won't warn you. That's why I say it's not foreseeable. It's just logic doesn't always work. Because we're dealing with electricity. Who understands electricity? Even electrical engineers claim they understand it, but they don't. There's more to it than what meets their eye. And it's a funny thing. I learned something in my reading. I went to Wikibooks and read about negative resistance. It's a very interesting 2 articles in Wikibooks on negative resistance. And in the extras down below at the bottom, links linking out to external websites, locations, there was one on ham radio operation, and I read somewhere in some forum that radio operators already knew about negative resistance. It's nothing new to them. While we make a big song and dance like, woo, but they all have already known, and it doesn't surprise me because ham radio operators have to make kind of do in the real world. They have to make things work, on the fly and be adaptable. And so they have to be skillful in ways that people who are normally formally trained in electrodynamic theory can't accommodate themselves in the same way. The ham radio operators are streetwise, and so they're not going to quote you a bunch of theories like, oh, you can't do that. That's the wrong way to do that. There's no such thing as a wrong way, because a ham radio operator looks for solutions, doesn't care about laws of nature according to scientific dogma. They just want to get things to work, and they have to. Now that's the legacy or the stereotype, that I have of a ham radio operator, is to get things to work. And phooey, the laws and the notions we have about laws of nature, because that's what they are, they're just notions. And funnily enough, laws of nature are not really, we don't depict them accurately, and policy tends to tweak them into absurd, tortured conventions that have nothing to do with the real world, all to push a policy or 2 or 3 or 4. What else? So I've been tweaking my website, josephnewman.info, but mostly trying to, I was adding links. So the resources page now has 2 groups of links. The Newman motor links for background information and negative resistance links, and that's because I read some articles on Wikibooks that was really good on negative resistance. The guy went about it so, it's the same attitude that I have. Newman is not over unity if you take everything into account. And he was, describing negative resistance the same way. It was just blew me away. He was saying all a negative resistor does is it takes energy and converts it. It takes its voltage, some of its voltage, and converts it into amps, into current, or the other way around, depending on which version of negative resistance you're creating. Because that's what a fellow from Canada was asking me. Which version of negative resistance are you talking about? And he was being very scholarly and just giving me equations to test to see how much I know about equations. And I know nothing. I don't know anything about equations. Duh. I'm streetwise, which means my knowledge, but I'm theoretical streetwise, which is a weird version of streetwise. Is there such a thing? Because then it's imperfect, you know, because I don't have the actual experience of street smarts to balance out my knowledge and make it whole. If anything, it's quite imbalanced because it's very partial. So that got me on a junket to look for negative resistance articles, and I came across ones I didn't know existed, but in an area that's in the neighborhood of Wikipedia, Wikibooks. And it was two separate articles. And I'm not sure how they're different, and I don't really understand the articles that well, to tell you the truth. But its approach, the person's approach was so nice. I really loved it. And his theory, his thesis, I loved, basically. That negative resistance is not something magical. It doesn't come from the infinite void. See, Thomas Bearden, there was a link to Thomas Bearden, and he took, well, it's the vacuum state of space, you know. And that might sound weird, but there's a guy on YouTube, Clement, French dude, who does his videos in 3 different languages and a few in English, and he talks about these theories about space that makes the ether look very credible. Yeah, I'm gonna have to add those links to this video. They're really cool. Did I add that to my website? Yes, on the video page. So yesterday I added some videos to my video page, and I made a playlist on my Vinyasi YouTube channel to duplicate the videos on the video page of josephNewman.info. So you can watch the YouTube playlist or go to the video page of josephNewman.info. Either way, you'll get the same videos. And I added his 3 videos in English on space, although I call it space equals Akasha equals ether, and the electron, the magnetic field of the electron, of electric current, the magnetic field of the conductor, I think, and the magnetic field of the electron. 2 different videos. Fascinating, and they duplicate each other in many ways. They overlap. They repeat themselves to some degree. But they're fascinating videos on one person's theory of the ether and how it interacts with magnetism and current in a conductor. Really fascinating stuff. And he has more videos in the 2 foreign languages that he does videos in, French and I believe German, maybe, I don't know, than he does in English. English, he only has 3 videos that he's posted. But still, I'm grateful that he's done those 3 because his theories are really far out. And it's, you know, a lot of it's equations and empirical stuff from the legacy of physicists that dates back to the 1800s and 1900s. You know, a lot of people I don't know, like Hamilton and Rowland. You know, who are these people? I don't know, but he quotes them, he cites them, and he lays things bare in a way that sounds very provocative. So, anywho, I had some fun yesterday in this, and last night, yesterday, and this morning, making improvements, and you know, looking at forums. There was a Yahoo group that I went to that Ken Adachi maintains for his website, educateyourself.org, with a hyphen in the middle between educate yourself, the 2 words. Educate-yourself.org. He has a forum on Yahoo. So I posted some files there from, you know, having to do with the Joseph Newman website that I'm trying to create and make improvements on. Trying to spread things around, because my thesis is that Joseph Newman's motor is not over unity if we take the permanent magnet into account, which he didn't do, and the patent office didn't do either. And it resulted in his failure to get his motor across to the public, to get it established and accepted and generally understood. Now, as things go, it's pretty good because, permanent magnets last a long time, and the only thing that lasts a long time is the battery pack. But I did notice that on one website talking about the Newman motor, they actually did admit explicitly that it's over unity if you only took the batteries into account. And that's cool, because that's exactly up my alley. Now, whether or not they knew anything else, I don't know. They didn't state anything about the permanent magnet as a secondary source of energy. But Thomas Bearden does talk like that, although he keeps referring to the vacuum state of space as the secondary source of energy for any circuit. And of course that's been standard theory for Thomas Bearden. But I don't go there because I don't have to. I go to the magnet, the spinning magnetic field of the spinning permanent magnet as the secondary energy source, and then it starts to make sense as a very low efficiency device, extremely low. Waste, or I wouldn't say waste, let's just say it doesn't make use of all of its energy. It goes to waste in the sense that it's not being used. And so it has extremely low efficiency. My God, when I do my efficiency ratings of the Newman motor, it's down in the parts per million. That's how low, 1 to 10 parts per million. That's how low I peg it at. But that's because I'm including the spinning bar magnet as a secondary source of energy. So I'm trying to be a realist on the one hand, yet I'm trying to promote Newman on the other by not changing anything too much. I make a few suggestion changes. I put in the capacitor like he says. I increase the spin rate of the bar magnet, and then I do something he did not suggest. I put in a neon bulb style spark gap in line with the coil. And then I do something different, also, I double the number of coils and spinning bar magnets, but they're run in parallel off a single battery pack. And then I go further and I reduce the size of the battery pack. I cut it in half, and I reduce the size of the coil, but, and here's the kicker, I think to make the EV version, the power plant for the EV motor, it's not an EV motor. That's what Newman would do. He would just take his Newman motor and put it in an EV to run the EV, but that doesn't work. So I use it as a power plant to supply energy to a normal electric motor of an EV. But it's still hard to imagine it could be done because it would require a huge, massive bar magnet or set of magnets just to pull it off. A reduced size on the coil, and I have the cut in half the battery pack, but it would need a huge, huge set of bar magnets. We're talking, if he was talking about massive copper coil, move over Newman, for the Vinny version of an EV is a massive bar magnet. Oh my God, it would be so huge. And the only way to change the speed would be to change the size of that bar magnet. By having it a composition of bar magnets, and you take out some and you put some back in, and that would change the rotation speed, the RPMs, so that you could change your speed. Well, how can you do that? And the size of this thing would be massive if I, just off the top of my head. I didn't do the math yet on paper, but if, as an attempt to guess estimate. But it would have to be huge if my theory is correct that mass equals voltage on the bar magnet. While its inductance would be very weak in both, comparable to, the magnetic strength would be comparable to the table model inversion in chapter 6 of Newman's book, a 14-pound bar magnet. It would be relatively the same as that, except a lot bigger. So it would be even weaker because it would be diffused through the enlarged mass of the EV version. The magnetic strength would be diffused. It would be diluted. So, but we're talking massive. To emulate or simulate the voltage increase, my simulation of the table model for chapter 6 was, I think, 255 microvolts, or 5.5 microvolts, somewhere around in there. But to make the EV version of 10 volts or 35 volts means I would have to increase the mass by a factor of 100,000. So take 100,000 times 14, and that's 1.4 million pound of bar magnet composition. That is huge. And so nobody's going to be building, my guess estimate of a Newman motor for the electric car anytime soon. But it's true. Everything I simulate is not practical. There's always some catch. And if I don't find it right away, it takes me a while. Eventually I find it. And here's the catch. It would be a 1.5 million pound bar magnet. Even though the coil is reduced, let's see. Well, it's not, you have to do the square. Let's see, so if it's 5 million to 1 versus 7,000 to 1, or let's round up to 8,000 because it's over 7,000 turns ratio, then you do a ratio proportion between 5 million and 8,000. Let's say it's 5,000. So that's 1,000 to 1 difference between the table model and the EV version. So the coil is reduced by, its mass is reduced by a factor of 1,000. So if you go from 145 pounds, we're talking a fraction of a pound. On the coil, a fraction of a pound. While the bar magnet is increased from 14 pounds to 1.5 million pounds. That's an increase factor of 100,000. So we reduce the coil by a factor of 1,000, its mass, while increasing the mass of the bar magnet by a factor of 100,000. So if you take those two changes into account, the total change is 100,000 times 1,000, which is 100 million. That's how much change undergoes the size of the bar magnet along with the size of the coil just to make the EV work. So we have to emphasize now the bar magnet. It's huge, and de-emphasize the coil, which is what Newman was doing all along. He was pushing the size of the coil, push, 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 and I'm doing the opposite. In order for it to work, according to my simulation and what little I understand about trying to look for real-world equivalence between my simulation and the real world, so that somebody could envision building it, and that you couldn't. According to my estimation, it's not readily doable. But at least I understand how to I can guess. I can take guesses as to how to understand making an equivalence between my simulation and the real world. Anyway, I think I've said enough.